What if the greatest victory lap in rock history was also a man's final countdown? Tom Petty played nearly 50 shows on a hip his doctors said would break, managed by fentanyl patches just to reach the microphone. The tour grossed $60 million. Then, 7 days after the final encore, he was gone. His last words to the crowd, "We're almost out of time." None of them knew he was right. This is the rise and fall of Tom Petty. Gainesville, Florida, the early 1950s. It wasn't the kind of place that produced rock and roll legends. It was a conservative southern town, hot and quiet, built around the University of Florida and the rhythms of old southern life. And into that world, on October 20th, 1950, Thomas Earl Petty was born, into a home where the music he would one day make felt like the only way out. His father, Earl Petty, was a hard man, traditional, rough-edged, and often cruel. The young Tom Petty found little comfort inside those walls. He was quiet, artistic, sensitive, everything his father didn't understand and didn't try to. Rock and roll didn't just entertain him, it saved him. It gave him a place where who he was made perfect sense, even if nothing else in his life did. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Then, in the summer of 1961, something happened that changed the entire direction of his life. His uncle worked for a local motion picture service and had connections on the set of an Elvis Presley film called Follow That Dream, being shot in nearby Ocala, Florida. A 10-year-old Tom Petty stood on that set and watched Elvis move. He later said Elvis glowed. That wasn't the word of a starstruck fan. That was the word of a future artist who suddenly understood in his bones what was possible. He traded his slingshot for a stack of Elvis 45s and never looked back. 3 years later, watching the Beatles on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1964, he learned the second great lesson. Music was a collective act. A group of friends, just friends, could build their own world together. They didn't need a record label's permission. They didn't need a rich family or a music school degree. They just needed each other and the music. He formed band after band, the Sundowners, the Epics, learning by doing, failing better each time, night after sweaty night in the Florida heat. Eventually, all those efforts crystallized into Mudcrutch, a local powerhouse that blended southern rock, country, and the driving urgency of the British invasion. They became the biggest thing in Gainesville. But Gainesville wasn't enough. In 1974, Mudcrutch packed up and drove to Los Angeles. He had worked the grounds crew at the University of Florida for grocery money. He had sold blood plasma for $15 a day. He had nothing to fall back on. He went anyway. That stubbornness, that specific refusal to accept a smaller life, was already fully formed. It would define every decision he made for the next 43 years. Los Angeles didn't welcome them with open arms. Mudcrutch signed to a record deal and released a single called Depot Street in 1975. It went nowhere. The band dissolved. For a lesser man, that would have been the ending. For Tom Petty, it was just the beginning of a different story. The label saw something in Petty and offered him a solo deal. He could have taken the safer path. Instead, he went back to find his people. He reconnected with guitarist Mike Campbell, there since those early Gainesville days, a man whose musical instincts perfectly complemented Petty's own, who could hear what Petty heard without needing it explained. Together they brought in keyboardist Benmont Tench, bass player Ron Blair, and drummer Stan Lynch. They called themselves the Heartbreakers, a name that suited them in more ways than one. Their self-titled debut arrived in 1976. In America, it barely registered. But in Britain, something caught fire. British audiences, mid-punk explosion, heard in the Heartbreakers a lean, urgent sound that spoke their language without pretension. A UK tour turned the tide. When American Girl and Breakdown finally began their slow march across American FM radio, they did it the organic way, one listener at a time, one late-night drive at a time. American Girl wasn't just a song, it was a feeling, that restless, searching ache for something just out of reach, set against the open road. It became one of those songs that seemed to exist before it was written, like it had always been waiting there. Then came the fight that turned Tom Petty into a folk hero. When his original label was bought out, Petty suddenly found himself owned by a corporation he'd never agreed to work for. He described it as being bought and sold like a piece of meat. On May 23, 1979, he did something almost unheard of in the music business. He filed for bankruptcy. Not because he was broke, but as a calculated legal maneuver to force a contract renegotiation. He put himself $500,000 in debt to prove a point about artistic sovereignty. He also fought on the retail price of his next album, Hard Promises. When the label tried to raise the list price from $8.98 to $9.98, Petty went public with the battle and refused to budge. "If we don't take a stand," he said, "one of these days records are going to be $20. He won that fight too. And then, under that impossible pressure, working with producer Jimmy Levine, he made Damn the Torpedoes. The album reached number 2 on the Billboard 200. Don't Do Me Like That became their first major top 10 single. Refugee became one of their defining rock anthems and a radio staple, even without quite cracking the top 10. Tom Petty was no longer just a musician, he was a symbol. Most bands burn bright and fade. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers just kept going. Through the 1980s, while their contemporaries crashed on the rocks of excess or irrelevance, the Heartbreakers remained a relentless, touring, recording machine. They were the band that showed up night after night and delivered. No theatrical disasters, no lineup implosions. Just the music, played well, for the people who came to hear it. The decade brought experimentation and ambition. The Southern Accents album in 1985 pushed into psychedelic and soul territory. The music video for Don't Come Around Here No More, with Petty as a visually arresting Mad Hatter, became one of the defining images of the MTV era. During the recording of that album, a frustrated Petty punched a studio wall in a moment of creative rage and shattered the bones in his left hand, causing permanent nerve damage. He kept recording anyway. Then came the moment that elevated him from rock star to rock royalty. In 1988, Petty found himself in a supergroup alongside Bob Dylan, George Harrison, Roy Orbison, and Jeff Lynne, the Traveling Wilburys. For the kid who had traded his slingshot for Elvis records in Ocala, Florida, standing shoulder to shoulder with 2 former Beatles was the kind of thing you didn't dare dream about in Gainesville. But there he was, and he belonged. The Wilburys rejuvenated him. The energy poured directly into Full Moon Fever in 1989, officially a solo album, but featuring nearly every Heartbreaker. It produced 3 songs that would follow him to the end: Free Fallin', I Won't Back Down, and Runnin' Down a Dream. The album went 5 times platinum. The peak crystallized on a cold February night in 2008 at Super Bowl 42. Playing for over 100 million viewers, Petty and the Heartbreakers walked onto the biggest stage in American entertainment and did the most Tom Petty thing imaginable. They played their songs, straight ahead. No tricks, no spectacle. 4 songs. Pure rock and roll. The crowd sang every word. It was proof that his music had become part of the American DNA, woven into the memory of multiple generations who didn't need to be told what it meant. They already knew. Sustaining a run like that for 4 decades comes at a cost that doesn't show up in chart positions or platinum certifications. It shows up in the quiet places, in the marriages that couldn't survive the road, in the bodies that started giving out long before the will did. The 1990s brought personal upheaval alongside creative renewal. His long marriage finally collapsed under the accumulated weight of decades on the road. Working with producer Rick Rubin, he stripped everything back and made Wildflowers in 1994 raw, emotionally exposed, and honest in a way that his earlier records had never needed to be.
You belong among the wild.
Original drummer Stan Lynch departed the same year, after growing tension that stretched back to his exclusion from the Full Moon Fever sessions years earlier. Steve Ferrone stepped in, and the band moved forward. That was always their answer: move forward. Mike Campbell, his creative partner from those Gainesville days, had become the quiet backbone of the whole operation. For years, Campbell served as an unofficial peacekeeper, absorbing Petty's increasingly exacting leadership style, mediating tensions, keeping the machinery running when everything threatened to seize up. His memoir, Heartbreaker, described Petty as brutally honest to the point of cruelty, but also a loyal friend. who remained the band's undeniable center of gravity. Without Campbell, there likely would have been no Heartbreakers past a certain point. By the time the 2000s arrived, the physical toll was harder to hide. Petty dealt with emphysema, chronic knee problems, and the deep, accumulated fatigue of a man who had lived on a tour bus for the better part of 40 years. Then came the hip. A fractured hip, diagnosed before the 40th anniversary tour in 2017 even began. His doctors warned him about the risks of continuing. His wife Dana remembered him saying simply, "I just got home. I don't want to go to hip replacement surgery. I want to be home with my wife and my dog." He didn't cancel. He never canceled. That stubbornness was both his greatest quality and, in the end, his undoing. He had shows to play, and he was going to play every single one. When the 2017 40th anniversary tour launched, it felt like a celebration. Because it was. Over nearly 50 shows, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers played to upwards of 600,000 fans and grossed over $60 million. For a band with no current hit record, no viral moment, no streaming algorithm pushing them, just 40 years of earned loyalty, it was extraordinary. The setlists were crafted as a journey through time. Songs from the earliest days sat alongside MTV-era anthems and deep cuts that made longtime fans feel personally seen. Fans who had first heard American Girl as teenagers in 1977 now stood in those arenas as grandparents. The song hit them exactly the same way it always had. That was the miracle of what Petty had built. Music that didn't age because it had been honest from the very beginning. Behind the scenes, the miracle was medical as much as musical. To manage the pain of his fractured hip, worsening with every show, Petty was prescribed fentanyl patches alongside other pain medications. His crew noticed he was grimacing getting off the tour bus. He gripped backstage railings. He needed help climbing the stairs to the stage. But the moment he walked into the lights and the crowd erupted, something transformed. He stood straighter. His voice found its power. The energy of tens of thousands of people seemed to physically lift him.
And I won't back down.
Before the last encore of the last show, Petty paused at the microphone and looked out at the crowd. "I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight," he said. "We love you dearly. I want to thank you for 40 years of a really great time." Then, just before the opening chords of American Girl, the song that had started it all 4 decades earlier, he smiled quietly and said, "We're almost out of time. We got time for this one right here." He was right. They were almost out of time. None of them knew how little was left. 7 days. That was all that separated the triumph of that final show from the silence of October 2nd, 2017. That morning, Tom Petty was found unconscious at his home in Malibu. He suffered cardiac arrest and was rushed to a local medical center and placed on life support. When doctors examined him, they found no brain activity. He was 66 years old, just 18 days from his 67th birthday. The news broke in waves. Social media stalled. Radio stations went quiet and then pivoted to his catalog. Fans who had been singing along under the Hollywood Bowl stars just a week earlier sat in their cars on the side of the road and wept. The contrast was almost impossible to hold. A man that alive and present on a stage, gone before the concert wristbands had faded. The medical examiner's report told the hidden story. Tom Petty died of multi-system organ failure caused by an accidental drug overdose, a combination of fentanyl, oxycodone, and other prescribed medications. His family later explained that he had been battling emphysema, knee problems, and a fractured hip, and that on the day he died, he learned the hip had gone from a fracture to a full break. Pain they believed had become simply unbearable and led to his overuse of medication. They emphasized that he had been using the drugs under medical care to manage severe pain, not chasing a high. In an act of remarkable transparency, his family chose to make the cause of death public. They hoped it could save lives by opening an honest conversation about how easily a legitimate injury could spiral into an unintended dependency on medications that most people don't fully understand. It was, in its way, a final act of decency, true to who he had always been. Bob Dylan called the news shocking and crushing, and said Petty was full of the light. Bruce Springsteen described him as a long-lost brother. For the fans who had spent 40 years with his voice in their ears, the tributes felt right, but never quite sufficient. Some losses sit outside language. Tom Petty's death didn't diminish his music. If anything, it deepened it. When Learning to Fly comes on the radio now, it carries more weight. When I Won't Back Down fills a room, people go a little quiet, out of something close to reverence. He sold tens of millions of records worldwide. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inducted him in 2002. The Heartbreakers, Mike Campbell, Benmont Tench, Ron Blair, and Steve Ferrone, remained intact through 4 decades of success and strain without the spectacular implosion that defined so many of their peers. That loyalty was built deliberately, year by year, show by show, in the shared belief that this music was worth protecting. The posthumous estate faced its own turbulence, a legal dispute over control of the catalog. But those conflicts couldn't touch what had already been created. The music lived independently of the business surrounding it. An American Treasure, released in 2018, gathered deep cuts and forgotten gems. Songs like Shadow of a Doubt and Straight into Darkness finding audiences who had somehow missed them the first time. Even after 40+ years, there were still discoveries to be made. For the listeners who grew up with Tom Petty, who heard American Girl from a car radio on a summer night, who wore out their copy of Damn the Torpedoes, who stood in arenas next to their own kids and watched the Heartbreakers play, his story is personal in a way that runs deeper than fandom. He ran the same race they ran. He pushed through the same kind of pain. He kept going when stopping would have been easier. He built something that lasted. He never backed down. Not from the record labels, the broken hand, the fractured hip, or the road that just kept going. And the music he left behind is the permanent record of that refusal. Still on the radio, still moving people, still landing exactly as intended. That's not luck. That's a life's work. Tom Petty gave 40 years of himself to the music, to the band, and to the people who showed up night after night. He proved that longevity is its own form of rebellion and rock and roll. Where were you the first time you heard American Girl? Did you catch the 40th anniversary tour? Drop your memory in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the music that shaped a generation.